I'm Chelsea C., and I work with the Anchorage Police Department. I currently am assigned to our domestic violence unit under the Warrants Division. So domestic violence, by definition, is a pattern of abusive behavior. It's meant to gain or maintain power and control over another person in that relationship. Statutorily or like law-wise, it's a little bit different. So there's household members that are defined by Alaska statute. And then there are certain crimes that also are domestic violence. So if you have a relationship under that household member and you also have a certain crime, kind of like math, if you put the two together, you have domestic violence. Actually a pretty wide pool, which when I teach recruits, they're always kind of surprised. It can be current or former spouses, yes. It can be current or former people who are dating, people who have had a sexual relationship, but it can also be current or former roommates. So I always tell, recruits, think about your college roommate or, somebody you lived with a long time ago. Like that can also fall under domestic violence. Signs to look out for, I would say, it's different from case to case, but jealousy is a big one. And now I always say this and recruits are like, well, I've been jealous and well, me too. But if you start to look at the list and start ticking those boxes and you're adding things up, it obviously is going to paint a different picture than just somebody who feels jealousy. Other things are controlling finances, controlling relationships. So maybe the person controls who they see, if they can have a job or not, if they can have a car or not, if they have access to the bank account or not. So that kind of control in different aspects can be a warning sign as well. Sure, so I would say signs, is that person just not acting like themselves? And obviously this depends on how well you know that person. Is it someone who's been a lifelong friend or is it a coworker? But are they talking about how their partner controls certain aspects of their lives? Are they changing how they eat, how they dress, who they interact with? Are you noticing any kind of controlling behaviors occurring like at work? Is the partner showing up to check on them? Those, I say, would be signs of control in a relationship. So the cycle of violence is very difficult to detect sometimes, especially when somebody's in a relationship. It usually starts out with what we call the honeymoon phase, which is, everything's good, everyone's happy, things are going great. And then you enter into this kind of tension building phase. And usually this is described to me as walking on eggshells or walking on thin ice. Maybe a word can set the other person off or an action. But they feel this tension building. There can be arguments, there can be like throwing of items. It really just depends on the case. Then you have the explosion or the battering phase, which doesn't necessarily indicate physical violence, although it can. It can also be like punching a wall or anything that indicates this is kind of the tension bursting. Then we move right back into the honeymoon phase with, I'm sorry, it'll never happen again. And all of the reasons why that person should stay in the relationship. And we just kind of continue that cycle. A big question that I get asked is, how long is this cycle? And that really just depends. I have some people tell me this is happening on a weekly basis for them. And I have some people say this happens maybe once a year. So that really just depends on the relationship. And something that I kind of relate it to for helping understand is it's like a frog in boiling water. If you put a frog into boiling water, it's going to hop out immediately. If you put it into that cold water and slowly turn the heat up, it's going to sit there and it's going to boil to death. So I think about domestic violence when I think about that analogy because, usually it's not a first date that has this violence or this explosion. It's usually that honeymoon into tension into that explosion. So I'm here at the Boney Courthouse, and there's a lot of resources here for domestic violence. The biggest one is domestic violence protective orders. You can apply on the main level. There's an office called Domestic Violence Office. You can get all of the paperwork, any information here in that office. There's also an APD interview room, which I'm currently sitting in. So domestic violence investigators do like to come and use this room for interviewing. Yeah, so domestic violence is a tricky thing, right? Because It usually involves two adults, not always, but that person has the right to choose in their own life. And there's a lot of reasons why people decide to stay in domestic violence relationships or abusive relationships. The list is long, but some examples would be fear. They're afraid of repercussions. It could be some of the control aspects. If that person controls their finances or is controlling of the children, that person might not want to leave because they don't feel stable enough to do so, or they don't want to leave their children or have any kind of ramifications through court. And there's also the really simple just love and hope. I hear from victims quite a bit that they want to return to the kind of good days of the relationship that they had, or that honeymoon phase. So there's a lot of different reasons why people stay. I would say ways to support somebody who is in an abusive relationship. There's really two things. You can give them emotional support, which is really non-judgmental. I would say sometimes it's really difficult to understand why somebody does stay, but try not to show judgment, support them. Make sure they have access to resources like advocacy. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is a big resource with safety planning and reasons why people stay, reasons why people abuse, all kinds of different information there. And then you can also obviously give material support. Maybe that's something financial if they aren't able to stand on their own 2 feet. But it can also be as simple as, hey, can you give me a couch to crash on because I don't want to stay at my house tonight? Or can I keep my emergency go bag at your house? You can provide that kind of support as well. A major resource that I like to talk about is the community booklet here, which has a lot of resources on domestic violence, alcohol treatment, really anything you can think of. They have something in here for it for the community of Anchorage. This is particularly important for domestic violence. It talks about some of the warning signs, talks about the cycle of violence, and talks about different organizations on how to help. Also available online. There's a QR code on here that you can scan, and you can find all of these online as well.